Oh, hey man, I saw you had 1,500 subscribers on YouTube. I was just wondering, what sort of computer do you think I need? I want to get started myself. You don't need tech like PCs, bruh. Just buy my YouTube mastery course for $29.95 and you can be just like me. Yeah, sure, but don't I need a PC to like record and edit the videos and all that kind of stuff? Listen man, do you want to make it on YouTube or not? Well, why have you got your shirt off? Hey, hate to be the one to break it to you man, but you're acting like a real beta male cuck over there. Buy my alpha male course for $29.95 and you could be just like me. Oh, whatever. Bro, no, come on man. Charisma course, just $9.99, please, please. Oh my god. So you're thinking about getting started on YouTube from the ground up and you want to know what kind of PC you need to edit and record the footage. Together we're going to part out exactly the kind of PC that I would recommend to anybody starting on YouTube in 2023 and beyond. Let's transition over to the PC view to make it happen, Ken. So we've got two different builds depending on how much you've got to spend. We've got a build that comes in under $500 and we've also got a build that's going to come in under $900 as well, depending on how much you want to invest up front. We're going to be checking prices in the US and the UK, so we'll have builds for either territory, and I'll be telling you not only what I would build, as in what parts I would use, but I'll be telling you why I chose those parts as well, and sharing some insider information along the way. So let's get to it. Okay folks, so let's go in ascending order of price. So let's say you want to do the cheapest possible build that I would recommend. Let's go for it. So if you're just getting started, you don't need a video card yet. I would just get a half decent processor with built-in graphics. This would be fine for something like 1080p video editing, as long as you're using things like proxies. So let's go and find a CPU. Now, the CPU I would recommend at this budget would be the 5600G, AMD Ryzen 5 5600G. And there's a good reason for that. So one, it's a 6-core, 12-thread processor. So that's pretty good for 1080p video editing. You've got built-in graphics as well, which might accelerate some tasks, but I wouldn't really rely on it. It just means that you don't need a graphics card to run your monitors. It also comes with a Wraith Stealth cooler in the box, which will be fine for this CPU if you really do need to save every single penny. One of the other good things about this is an AM4 socket processor, which means that you get access to quite cheap motherboards because it's an older platform, if you like. So let's find a decent motherboard. So depending on your needs, you can get something with Wi-Fi or something without. Now let's say we want something with Wi-Fi. So if we scroll down here on PC Part Picker, you can just select the Wi-Fi options here. And then we're also going to want two M2 SSD slots so that you can expand it in the future. So you want to take this M2 slots here, and we're just going to put that to a minimum of 2 and then press enter. Then we're going to scroll all the way up to the top and we're going to sort it by lowest price. And you can see that at the top here we have the B550M DS3HAC. We've also got the B550 UDAC. Both of these would be great choices. This one, you might as well get the ATX full-sized one. So we can go for that here. It gives you a bit of extra expandability if you need it. But you don't need a super fancy motherboard for a 6-core processor. So let's just go ahead with this one. Now, if, say, you didn't need Wi-Fi, you're going to wire yourself in manually with an Ethernet cable, we could do the same thing. We'll put our M2 slots in, and we can change that to 2, but we don't need to add the Wi-Fi thing at the bottom. We're just going to sort it by price and see what's available. So even something like this ASRock B550 would be fine, really. If you need to save money, go for it. It's only a 6-core processor that we're using. The downside of going with a slightly lower-end board like this is that if you want to upgrade the CPU later, you don't have quite as much in the power delivery on the motherboard. So for now, we're going to stick with this because I think most people probably would want Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but there is an extra saving to be made if you don't need those things. Another one of the advantages of being on AM4 is that you can use DDR4 memory instead of DDR5, and the speeds aren't actually in real life too much different. And memory is going really cheap right now, so we can easily get 32 gigabytes, which is certainly what I'd recommend for any video editing workstation. Certainly want 32 gigabytes. The speed you're going to want is 3600, so we're going to type that into the speed as the minimum and press enter. And then we're also going to get 2 lots of 16 gigabytes here. Now you could go for 4 lots of 8 in the list here, but actually it's not really going to get you anything any cheaper. and 2 sticks is usually a lot more stable than 4 sticks. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to, again, sort by price, the lowest, and we're just going to choose the cheapest one, because realistically, it doesn't really make much difference whether you go for a posh RAM set or a cheap one like this. So let's go for it. As long as it's a sort of a half-decent brand, like Team Group's pretty good. I wouldn't go with any of those no-name Amazon brands, but apart from that, you'll be fine. It's 3600 speed, it's CL18, and we've got 2 sticks. Ideal. Now for storage, the bare minimum for a workstation computer is going to be 1 terabyte, and even then you're cutting it a bit fine. So for storage, we want an NVMe SSD, and this is actually one of the hardest things to choose for a video editing workstation. Now we definitely want at least 1 terabyte, so I'm just going to put 800 gigabytes in here, because then you get all the ones that are 960 gig, which is basically a terabyte anyway. We're going to scroll down to the bottom, we're going to change NVMe to yes, and then we're going to scroll all the way up to the top. Now this is where a bit of insider information comes in. We're going to sort by lowest price, but the important thing about an SSD, especially for workstation use, is that it has what's called a DRAM cache. So it has memory on board on the chip separate to the storage, which allows for fast access to that basically. It means that all your operations over a longer period of time are going to be much more consistent, because it can filter things in and out of that DRAM cache rather than having to filter it back to your PC's own RAM, which introduces a bit of latency. So the problem with PC Part Picker is it doesn't actually always pick up, even though there's a column here for cache, right? It doesn't always pick up the ones that have the DRAM cache or not. So it's where a bit of insider information comes in. Now you could just highlight and then search Google for it and then type DRAM after, click search and then type DRAM afterwards and find out if it's got a DRAM. You could do that. I did that for a lot of them, and essentially worked out that the one that you're probably going to want, the cheapest one, is this XPG SX8200 Pro. I know for a fact that this has DRAM on board, so that's going to be perfect for your long editing sessions. So something like the Samsung 980, you might think, oh, it's a Samsung, it's a lot better, but it doesn't actually have a DRAM cache. The 980 Pro does, but the 980 on its own does not. Now, there's a bit of controversy around this drive, but it's still going to be perfect for a video editing workstation, especially if we're on a budget. So we're going to add that in. So looking pretty good so far, so not too bad on the pricing. We've got a few extra bits to add to make this a full computer. So we want a case to hold all of this stuff, so let's do that. Now you don't want anything fancy, but you don't want anything like a cheap, horrible, nasty plastic box either. So let's have a look. And again, just like SSDs, this is where a bit of insider information is useful. I would always suggest an ATX mid-tower case, as you see here on the left. Reason being is you've just got plenty of room for upgradability in the future. When you start going for things like micro ATX, it does limit you in the future if you want to upgrade. So we're going to select ATX mid-tower, and I don't think there's particularly anything else from the list here we need to have a look at. So we'll just scroll up to the top, and again, we'll just sort it by price here. You can quickly hover over each one and you can see which ones are likely to be okay, which ones have mesh. So this DIY PC might actually be okay. I've never actually used it before, and I'm not sure whether the fans on board are Molex or if they are sort of a standard PWM. So I'm going to avoid that one for now. I'm going to go with one that I know is pretty good. So let's keep scrolling down until I find something that I recognize. So maybe this one would be a good one, a Deepcool CC560. There is a review on the channel of that one if you want to see it, but I know it's going to work well. It's decent size, it's well built for the money, and it comes with 4 decent fans as well. So we'll add that one to the cart. So we're doing quite well. Just really one key part left to get now, which is the power supply. So there's a few ways you can go with the power supply. I'm a fan of slightly over-speccing your power supply, getting something slightly better than what you need. The reason being is that it gives you that expandability in future without having to change it. But I understand if you're on a budget, you might want to get the cheapest one possible. Let's see what we can get. But again, just like SSDs and cases, it sometimes helps to have a little bit of insider information. So the filters I'd probably choose on this one, I'd probably just tick all of these 80 pluses except the bottom one here. I'm going to want at least, I think I'm going to say 500 watts here. Now this system, you can actually run it very easily on a 300 watt power supply, but it doesn't give you any room to upgrade or add graphics cards in the future. And for the maybe $10 to $15 that you save, it's probably not worth it. The rest of these, we can leave them all blank because it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm going to sort by price again. We're going to see what's available. So I'm going to avoid Raid Max. I don't really like them as a power supply manufacturer. We're also going to avoid Apevia. Now, Silverstone, not bad usually. Doesn't just because it's Silverstone brand though, it doesn't actually mean it's going to be any good. It's really hard to know with power supplies. You could look at something like the PSU Cultist tier list, which will tell you roughly how good a power supply is. It's not always right. But again, a bit of experience from someone that knows what they're doing also helps. Now, I've used these Thermaltake Tough Powers before, and I've had no problems with them whatsoever. I've used the 850 watt version, and they've been solid running RTX 3080 systems with i7 12700K. Absolutely no problems at all. So I'm pretty happy with the Tough Power series. The Seasonic S123, it's lower end, but it'll certainly do the job here if you wanted that. I don't like Thermaltake Smart series. Cougars I would completely avoid. EVGAs, they're pretty good, so this one would be alright, although it's 500 watts as opposed to the 600 that we're getting here. The efficiency ratings, I wouldn't pay too much attention to these. Generally, gold rated units are better, but it's not a guarantee. All this tells you is how efficient it is at pulling electricity from your home electricity supply. It doesn't actually tell you anything about how good the internals are. It's a roughly good guide, but there's plenty of gold power supplies out there that are really bad, and there's lots of bronze power supplies out there that are pretty good. So again, insider information is kind of what you need here, but I think this Thermaltake Tough Power would be a great choice, so let's go with that one. And that's the end of this build. Now if I can maybe zoom us out a little bit so you can see it all in one go. There we are. So we have our 5600G B550 UDAC. We've got our 32 gigs of Team Group. We've got a 1 terabyte DRAM buffered SSD. We have case CC560, and we've got our Thermaltake 600 watt gold. I think that's pretty decent. $460, that's going to get you started on YouTube, no problem. You're definitely going to want to work at 1080p resolution, and you want to use proxies. I'm not going to talk about what they are in this, but it's something that basically makes your video files smaller and easier to work with. If you wanted to upgrade this system, make it run a little bit smoother, you could add a CPU cooler, so that would probably keep the thing a bit quieter, maybe a little bit faster, but certainly quieter. And the one I really like for budget builds is the ID cooling, this one, the SE214XT. So it's pretty basic. I mean, maybe we could open it up there and see what it's like, but it's pretty basic, but it does the job for a 6-core processor. It's going to be absolutely fine. There's plenty of metal there. It's got a few heat pipes to dissipate the heat. That's going to be absolutely fine. I'd say that $19 you spend on that cooler is probably worth it if you've got that stretch available. So if you wanted to boost that up and get a better performing system, we only really have to make a couple of quick changes here, and it's going to make it much better. So things we want to change for the best improvement in performance in terms of video editing, photo editing, we want to probably change the CPU. So let's cross off the CPU off the list there. Now, otherwise, it's not actually too bad. So next thing I'd change is probably the storage. We can get a slightly faster storage and a better storage array. So let's get rid of the storage there. We'll also want to add a video card as well for hardware acceleration. So the other bits, though, they're going to be fine, and it's still going to give you that same cost saving that we spoke about before, but if you're willing to spend a bit more money, this is what I'd go with. So for the CPU, we can bump up to something with 8 cores, and there's very little out there that's as good value as the 5700X at the moment, so this would be a fantastic choice. Let's go for the 5700X. It is actually faster than the 5700G, which you can see is a bit cheaper here. So I'd still go with the 5700X. Sometimes the 5800X is within $5 or $10, so if it is, you could go for that. But for now, we'll keep our budget a bit lower, going with the 5700X. Now, with an 8-core processor, you definitely want a cooler on it. And that's ID cooling that we had before is actually still going to be plenty. So we could certainly go with this. We'll add it on for now. There are other choices if you want something a little bit more elaborate, so you could go with something like a 240mm liquid cooler. So we could do that by going to, yes, 240mm here, and sorting by lowest price, and you can see what's available. So even something like this ID cooling frost flow, that'll be fine. It won't look very nice though because it's white, so maybe you want to go for something like this black dash flow here for $70. That would be fine. It'd probably be a bit quieter than the air cooler, but I think the air cooler is going to be fine, so we're going to leave it at that for now. Motherboard and memory, we don't need to change those because they're already plenty for the components that we've got on offer here. We spoke about the storage array. We want to make that a bit different, and I'm going to explain why. We want actually 2 SSDs to make the best use. So you want a slightly smaller primary boot drive with your application like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro installed, and then you want a second drive on there for holding all your project files and where you write all of the data to. That means that you've got one SSD running Windows and you've got one SSD actually crunching the video files themselves. It's going to make it all a little bit faster. So the first one will be our boot drive, and we want that to be at least 500 gigabytes. So let's put 480 in there to catch them all. We're going to go and choose NVMe yes, and then we're going to sort by price again. Now I'm going to zoom in a bit again so that you get a slightly better view. And we can see what's available. And like I said before, it's about having a bit of insider information about which ones have DRAM cache on board, because it's still important even for a Windows drive. So I've been scrolling through the list, and the first one I can see that I know has DRAM on board is the Lexar NM620. I think actually towards the right of the photo you can actually see where the DRAM cache is. That's 512 gigs for about 28 bucks. That's pretty cheap, and that's plenty for your boot drive. And for our additional drive, I think we should really be going for 2 terabytes. If we're serious about YouTube, we need plenty of capacity. So I'm going to put 1800 in the capacity minimum and then press enter. We're going to go down, we're going to click NVMe yes, and then go back up to the top again, and we're going to sort by lowest price. And again, we're just scanning for ones that have a DRAM cache. So you might have to spend a bit of time Googling the product numbers and trying to find out whether they have DRAM cache or not. But I've already done the work for you here, and I know that the PNY Accelerate CS3030, terrible name by the way, I know that this has a DRAM cache on board, so let's add that, and that's going to be plenty. Now this is a PCIe Generation 3 drive, okay, so it's not as fast as a PCIe 4. So if you wanted a PCIe 4, we can have a look for one of those now, but I don't think it'll make too much difference if you're just doing 1080p video, maybe even a little bit of 4K. It doesn't make quite as much difference as everyone seems to think. But if you want it, you want it. So let's find it. Again, we just need to put our filters in, 1800 minimum capacity. We're going to choose M2 4x4 here, and NVMe yes, of course. Up to the top, sort by lowest price. So here's our list, and again, you just need to know about 1, the speeds, and 2, the DRAM cache, which I do know about because I do a lot of PC builds. What I'd recommend here is the first one I can see that's actually worth probably getting in terms of having a DRAM cache and the maximum speed available is going to be the 980 Pro. Other ones to look at for the same price, 980 Pro, obviously this one, you've got the WD Black SN850, and you've also got the Kingston KC3000. Those are my 3 go-tos for super fast SSDs, and they're basically all equivalent performance, so whichever one is the cheapest. In this case, the 980 Pro is cheaper, so we'll add that. So that the 980 Pro is if you want something that's super fast, you want to spend a bit more money, but for most people, the PCIe 3 drive is going to be fine. So with that in mind, we'll get rid of the PCIe 4 drive, but it's there as an option if you want it. Now, something to add to this system, of course, is a video card. Nowadays, your video editing applications, they're going to make more use of a video card, or a graphics card as we like to call it. It's going to be able to render those frames a lot quicker. It's going to help with scrubbing through footage. And when it comes to finding a good graphics card for your needs, I would stick with NVIDIA. You can go with Intel if you want, but I would probably stick with NVIDIA. They're a more trusted brand, if you like, in terms of video editing, so that's what I'd go with. And we're keeping it budget, so the ones I would probably have a look for, I'd probably filter for the RTX 3050 and the 3060 12GB. Don't get the 3060 8GB, definitely the 12. Scroll up to the top, sort by lowest price, and we can see what's available. So we have a choice. We can either go for something like this MSI Ventus 3050 at 220. This probably for most people is going to be fine. Even up to 4K footage, you could probably scale to that with this graphics card just about. But for a bit more grunt, you could scroll down and find the cheapest 3060 12GB. And that's again another MSI Ventus, and it's $280. So it's about $60 different. I would say getting this 3060 is probably worth the extra $60. Mostly because I think the graphics card will have better longevity, so you'll be able to sell it easier in the future. It's faster in pretty much every way, and it has more VRAM, which is definitely helpful for your video editing apps. They do like a bit of extra VRAM. So we're going to go with the 3060 Ventus, but if you wanted to save that $60, then the 3050 will do well in a pinch. And that's us finished. So let's scroll out and we can see the full price. So like we said, 8-core processor, tower cooler, basic B550 motherboard, which is all you need, 32 gigs of RAM, boot SSD, and then project SSD, 3060 graphics, decent case, decent power supply, and that's all going to come to about $885. I think that's actually pretty reasonable for what would be considered a pretty moderate video editing workstation. It's not an absolute beast, but for YouTube videos, you probably don't really need an absolute beast, especially in the first year or so of you doing it. Once you start earning your money through YouTube and you can see that it's actually going to become a career that you're interested in, then you might want to think about upgrading. But for a hobbyist, this is really the most I would recommend anybody spend. And of course, I did promise you I'd do US and UK pricing. So rather than go through every single step again, the principles are basically the same. We'll just show you the differences between the UK and the US. So broadly, the UK one is the same as the US one. A couple of slight differences. I mean, we've still got the 5600G in the cheaper option. We've still got a B550 motherboard. This is a slightly smaller motherboard, but still be equivalent performance. Still got 32 gigs of RAM, just a different brand. We've still got a decent 1TB SSD. This one is probably a smidge slower, but it's still got the DRAM on board, and the price is excellent. The case is slightly different again because it's all to do with what budget cases are available in each territory, but in my case the Magforge 100M is probably the best choice that I could find that's got decent ventilation, decent build quality, and the power supply is different, again for those territorial reasons, different stock in different regions, but the MSI A650BN is going to be fine for this, and that all comes out to about £415. And just like the US version, for the slightly more expensive version, we have this one with the 5700X 8-core processor. Again, pretty much broadly the same. 8-core processor, tower cooler, exactly the same one in fact. Again, the smaller version of the motherboard, but it's still going to do a great job. Still got the 32 gigs, and we've still got our two different storage drives here. We've got the 970 Evo Plus 2TB as our project drive, and we've got the SX8200 Pro as the boot drive. These are going to do a fantastic job. And then we've also got the same video card again, actually at 265 quid. And then we've got the same case and same power supply that we just mentioned in the last one. That all comes out to about £844. So actually, I think once you factor in the currency conversion, the American prices are actually a decent bit cheaper. But I suppose you have to bear in mind that the UK prices, they also include the sales tax. So that's something to bear in mind. So here are the 4 different options on screen, 2 from the UK and 2 from the US, and you can sort of compare and contrast. But the entry-level build is somebody that's just getting started, not got quite as much money to spend, but still wants to do this YouTube thing as a hobby. 1080p will be fine for editing on this system. And then if you want to go for something a little bit better, you want to do high-quality 1080p or maybe even some entry-level 4K, you can certainly do that with the slightly more expensive options. Just like any PC, you can go infinite with the budget and get more performance, but I thought on this video I would focus on builds that are under $500 and under $1,000, try and get it to the lowest possible price so that you can start this hobby without breaking the bank. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, another different style of video. I haven't done a PC part picker list in a while, so put your thoughts down below in the comments. Is there anything that you would change or disagree with? I love having a conversation down in the comments. And until next time, catch ya!